Chapter 7. Literally, it has been confirmed that the blood, hair and visceral fragments left in Chen Ping's bathroom belonged to the victim ᎢℋᎪNN, and the fingerprints on the knife were consistent with Chen Ping's own. The hair should have Chapter 7. Literally, it has been confirmed that the blood, hair and visceral fragments left in Chen Ping's bathroom belonged to the victim ᎢℋᎪNN, and the fingerprints on the knife were consistent with Chen Ping's own. The hair should have fallen into it accidentally, and it is basically confirmed that the murderer who killed the victim and shredded his body was Chen Ping. While reading the inspection report, ᎢℋᎪNN directed everyone to release news, notify the victim's parents and other follow-up matters. Afterwards, ᎢℋᎪNN put together the inspection report in his hand, turned his head to look at Lu Yi, who had been watching from the sidelines, and taught him a lesson. You must know that most murderers are murderous with passion. And people are in an extreme situation. Under the emotional conditions, she suddenly became angry, and she wanted to kill, so she killed. It didn't make sense. Maybe she was terrified of herself after the event. I have heard many confessions from criminal suspects, saying that they are possessed at that time. What motivational analysis, psychological analysis, does it work? Well, I know that if you are reliable, pigs can climb trees. Lu Yi didn't say a word. Hearing this, he just smiled. ᎢℋᎪNN had discovered long ago that Lu Yi never argued with anyone, and others disagreed with him. If he was given a chance to speak, he might explain his reasons and opinions in a very unhurried manner. When he had the chance to speak, he was happy to omit the steps of explaining and defending, and only regarded the other party's words as a passing fart. Seeing his expression, ᎢℋᎪNN immediately became nervous. No, then do you have any ideas? Lu Yi pointed to the interrogation room. Why didn't you ask her? Chen Ping's mental state was strange. As soon as ᎢℋᎪNN saw her, he felt that this woman was just a skin, and her soul had already flown to somewhere, so she just sat there blankly, neither struggling nor complaining. Her eyes were red, and she had no strength to cry, and even her voice was weak. No matter what others asked her, Chen Ping always said something like a gossip. I don't know, I didn't kill anyone. ᎢℋᎪNN glanced at Lu Yi, pushed the door and entered the interrogation room. ᎢℋᎪNN was nearly 1.9 meters tall, with broad shoulders and a sharp face, giving him a sense of oppression. The moment he walked into the interrogation room, Chen Ping instinctively shivered. ᎢℋᎪNN sat down opposite her, staring into her eyes. Chen Ping's eyes quickly turned from wooden to fear and dodge, unnaturally daring not to meet his gaze. ᎢℋᎪNN, do you know ᎢℋᎪNN? Chen Ping nervously tightened her handcuffed hands and nodded stiffly. Then you should be more familiar with his father, right? ᎢℋᎪNN looked at her expressionlessly. A witness said that you have used your position many times to enter and leave the community where the victim lives. Is this true? Chen Ping's voice was like a mosquito. I occasionally send some work items to Mr. Zhao. ᎢℋᎪNN interrupted her. There's no need for an excuse. Tell me where you were yesterday afternoon. When he spoke suddenly, Chen Ping shivered all over. The sound of metal crashing came from her hand. Her eyes were almost dull, and she was speechless for a while. Don't want to tell? Then I'll tell you. Yesterday afternoon, you sneaked into the victim's residence and waited for the opportunity to deceive ᎢℋᎪNN, who was playing near home. The child must have seen you, regarded you as a mature person, and did not defend you, so you could quietly take him away and then kill him. I didn't kill anyone. Chen Ping's eyes widened suddenly, her face was as pale as a wax figure, and the muscles on her face kept twitching. She didn't know where the courage came from. Her erratic eyes suddenly retracted, and she stared at ᎢℋᎪNN with blank eyes. I didn't kill, I didn't kill, I didn't kill. She seemed to have suddenly become a repeater. She couldn't say anything except these words, and it kept repeating like a cassette. ᎢℋᎪNN was a little impatient and took out a photo from the file bag. It was Chen Ping's bathroom floor full of blood. He patted the table and pushed the bloody photo to the woman without saying a word. Staring at her without blinking. Chen Ping gasped like a chicken with its neck strangled, and stopped on the spot. Then what is this? ᎢℋᎪNN asked. Huh? What about the bloodstains and pieces of internal organs found in your bathroom? There are your fingerprints on the handle of the knife, there is a remaining human little finger bone in the pressure cooker, and there was your hair in the body bag full of minced meat in the Park River Gully. Is this evidence still? Speaking of which, ᎢℋᎪNN's voice suddenly and subtly paused, and in an instant he realized something. Wait, these so-called evidences seem to be evidence of her shredding his corpse, but murder? It seems that nothing can directly prove. The next moment, ᎢℋᎪN felt that he was influenced by Lu Yi's freak. Even if the broken corpse was not a murderer, she could not escape an accomplice, so he snorted coldly and finished his words. Is this evidence not enough? What else is there to say? Chen Ping suddenly burst into a hoarse cry. ᎢℋᎪN sat opposite Chen Ping, waiting for her sudden outburst to pass, then took out a half-pack of napkins from his pocket, put on the table and pushed it in front of her. Chen Ping glanced at him hesitantly, lowered her head carefully, and wiped her face with a tissue with her limited range of motion. ᎢℋᎪN thought for a while and lowered his voice. Well, you said you didn't kill someone just now, but you did go to the victim's residence yesterday, didn't you? Chen Ping nodded and said in a hoarse voice, I've been there. ᎢℋᎪN, what time? What to do? Probably, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Chen Ping bit her lip. He pushed my date. I want to go to his house to have a look. Do you go there often? Chen Ping hesitated for a moment, then nodded. ᎢℋᎪN, what do you do? Chen Ping, sometimes it's business, giving him something, and sometimes. She couldn't go on. ᎢℋᎪN added indifferently for her, go peeping at ᎢℋᎪNN. Chen Ping's eyes turned red, she quickly buried her head, and wiped the corners of her eyes with a tissue that had been rubbed into a ball. ᎢℋᎪN folded his arms across his chest, leaned back on the chair, and looked at Chen Ping condescendingly. Then when did you leave? Night. ᎢℋᎪN raised his eyebrows. Our people are all searching nearby at night. Where are you? Chen Ping said in a low voice, I'm in the International Culture Street opposite the community. There's a bar where I eat. From the attic of that bar, I can just see the front yard of Mr. Zhao's house. This was accidentally found by me. Hearing that, stalking and peeping has become a habitual offender. ᎢℋᎪN rolled his eyes greatly, and then. I saw a lot of police cars after eating, and then I knew something happened to his family. When did you leave? I sat in the bar for a while. I probably left after 9 o'clock in the evening. ᎢℋᎪN, one person. Chen Ping closed her eyes and said in a weak voice, I was really alone when I left. You believe me, I didn't kill anyone. I know, I'm a shameless bad woman in your eyes. I may a bit shameless, but I'm not crazy. I haven't even killed a chicken. Let alone a person. It's still Mr. Zhao's child. She blurted out these words, and seemed to have vented something. Her thinking ability seemed to have recovered a little. After a pause, Chen Ping choked, and then said softly and quickly, be further, even if I really want to do that, Mr. Zhao's son won't go with me. The child's mother probably told him. Every time he sees me, he will throw things at me and make faces. He hates me very much and never approaches me within 5 meters. How can I kidnap him? Judging from Mrs. Zhao's reaction, Chen Ping's words are not unreasonable. There is another situation, ᎢℋᎪN said. Perhaps while the victim was not paying attention, you suddenly attacked him from behind in some way, knocking him out and taking him away. Given that the victim was only 7 or 8 years old, it is operable for you as an adult. Chen Ping sighed, then smiled bitterly. Officer, if you must think so, I can't help it. She had a face of resignation, but Lee Yonghae's mind was still running fast, and his fingers tapped on the table. Although he just raised a possibility, there is a very important question. Maybe Mrs. Xia really didn't see it. After all, she is also a person. She can't help but be careless, but how did Chen Ping avoid those cameras in the high-end community? How could she know which cameras were broken and which were still working? Is there a possibility of accomplice? Lee Yonghae admitted at this time that Lu Yi's judgment of her was not wrong. Chen Ping was indeed a relatively passive person, with a cowardly personality and little courage. He dared to say that if a woman like Chen Ping accidentally clashed with others, she would definitely not scold them directly. Then if she was the murderer who kidnapped and killed Zhao Xiahua, what made her take such a big risk to kidnap a child who was already quite young under the eyes of the child's mother who hated her to the core? Chen Ping is just a young woman who is much thinner than a girl of the same age. She is a typical urban white-collar worker who has never done manual labor. She does have the ability to subdue guys, but can she really guarantee that she will hit and be silent? Lee Yonghae paused, then asked, "What about when you get home?" After that I went to a 24-hour supermarket, and when I opened the trunk of the car with a shopping bag, I found out. At some point in my trunk, someone put a large black plastic bags. Lee Yonghae, it's the one you used when you dumped the corpse. Chen Ping lowered her eyelids and took a deep breath, as if remembering something extremely terrifying, and her breath was trembling. I didn't know what was in the plastic bag at the time, but I saw the length and size of the bag. I just felt like the hair was standing on end. At that time, I instinctively closed the trunk immediately, drove home to the private garage, and then I dared to open the plastic bag. It turned out to be a person inside. A little boy. I didn't even see that he was Mr. Zhao's son at first. I was already scared crazy, really scared crazy. For a while, my mind was blank, and things fell all over the floor. Lee Yonghae asked calmly, "You said you didn't recognize him as Zhao Lishu's son, because the boy was already dead at that time, and he didn't look the same as when he was alive." Chen Ping nodded immediately. Lee Yonghae looked at her for a while, sat up straight, leaned forward slightly, and rested his elbows on the table. "What do you mean, you didn't kidnap or kill Zhao Xiahua, after someone killed him, in order to blame you? They put him in your car unknowingly." Chen Ping quickly wiped her eyes with a wrinkled tissue and nodded again. "Assuming what you said before is true, someone found your car by some means, pried your car lock, and put a dead child in your car." Lee Yonghae stared at her eyes, asked word by word, "Why did they do this?" "Well, we can ignore why the murderer did it. Let's talk about you first. How do normal people react when they see a dead body? You tell me, why didn't you at that time? Call the police. Why don't you call someone, or even contact the victim's family when you recognize the identity of the body, but bring the child's body to your house, and then discard it after boiling it?" Chen Ping's emotions became agitated again. She was speechless and hesitated for a long time. Because I thought, if I called the police, others would think it was me who killed. I was scared at that time. I was so scared, really. I don't even know what I was thinking. I was outside the community at the time, and when I saw the police car later, I knew what happened. I understood that the child has been lost. I didn't an alibi. I have a motive for murder." Lee Yonghae, "What's your motive for the murder?" Chen Ping slowly raised her head and said with a bleak face, "The reason why Mr. Zha refused to divorce his wife is because of that child." Lee Yonghae, "So you thought so, right? I mean kill that child." Chen Ping stared at him blankly, and suddenly 2 lines of tears fell. Lee Yonghae said indicating that he had no more questions, nodded to the colleague who was in charge of recording the interrogation process, stood up and walked out. At this moment, Chen Ping suddenly stopped him. "Officer, do you think I'm lying?" When she said this, her voice seemed to be suppressing something, her whole body was in a very tense state of defense, and her head was getting lower and lower. Lee Yongheo suspected that her chin had already touched her chest, and her voice became smaller and smaller. In the end, she was almost talking to herself, but her tone was steady, as if she saw that she had no hope. I didn't lie, Chen Ping murmured. I also know that if there is no evidence, the police can't insist that I was the killer, but you have to investigate, and in the end, you must reveal the relationship between me and Mr. Zhao. She sniffed hard and said softly, then it's over. Li Yongheo asked, what's over? Everything is over. She said almost calmly, my life, and my career. If it wasn't for Lu Yi accompanying him, Li Yongheo would have thought that either Chen Ping's brain had a problem, or she thought there was something wrong with the police's brain. Who the hell would finds one, a perverted and unbelievable stress response like destruction of a corpse? But Lu Yi mentioned that Chen Ping is a person who may be smart, but tends to avoid everything. Li Yongheo suddenly felt that he understood a little bit. This is also the case for some children when they get into trouble. The first reaction is not to think about the way to make up and solve the problem, but how to cover up the fault to the parents. Assuming that Chen Ping's words are true, then her behavior is very close to this kind of child. On the surface, it seems that she did not cause trouble, because she didn't kill anyone, but in fact she clearly knows that she has hope Mr. Zhao's son disappeared. Maintaining an improper relationship with Zhao Lishu for a long time made her self-evaluation extremely low, and her behavior that was contrary to traditional moral values made her subconsciously feel that she was in trouble, so she tried to cover up the facts. While thinking about it, Li Yongheo took a disposable cup from the water dispenser in the corridor, poured a glass of water, pushed the door and walked into the monitoring room. Crayfish, you say her. His voice stopped, because Lu Yi was gone, and only a note was left on the table in the monitoring room. I'm going to the toilet. Isn't this cheating? When does our country's law stipulate that a written leave request is required to go to the toilet? End of chapter 7.